I knew he was cheating before he even realized it himself. The little things gave him away. The way his phone was suddenly glued to his hand. The new cologne he started wearing, one I hadn't bought him. The late nights at work, that didn't line up with the scent of expensive perfume on his shirt. And the biggest giveaway, the change in his touch. Men think women don't notice the shift. The absence of warmth, the hollowness in the kisses, the way their eyes stop seeing you even when they're looking right at you. But I noticed. And I could have confronted him, could have screamed and begged for an explanation. But I didn't. Because I wasn't going to cry over a man who underestimated me. No, I was going to make him pay. And when I was done, he would regret the day he ever thought he could betray me. My name is Evelyn Sinclair. My husband, James Sinclair, is the CEO of one of the largest financial firms in the country, Sinclair Global. He didn't come from money. No, I gave him the connections he needed to climb the corporate ladder. My family name opened doors for him. My strategic positioning made him the powerful man he is today. I didn't just build his career, I designed it. And James knew it. Which is why his betrayal was so much more insulting. I started noticing the signs about 6 months ago. James started working late. Coming home at odd hours. He was more distant. His kisses grew colder. He stopped touching me at night. But the real confirmation came 2 months ago. I had been out of town for a charity gala. When I returned home earlier than expected, I found a single earring on the floor of our bedroom. It wasn't mine. It was delicate gold with a small diamond embedded in the center. I held it between my fingers, feeling the rage simmer beneath my skin. I didn't confront him. Not then. Instead, I smiled sweetly at him when he came home that night, kissed him on the cheek and told him I had missed him. He smiled back, lying to my face. And that's when I knew how this would end. Not with tears, but with blood. I spent the next few weeks gathering information. James was careless, overconfident. He thought he was untouchable because he controlled the money and the influence. But what he didn't realize was that I controlled him. First, I installed tracking software on his phone. Simple enough to do while he was sleeping. Within days, I had access to his texts, his call logs, even his location history. Second, I started digging into Sinclair Global's financials. I already had access to the firm's accounts. James had listed me as a silent partner years ago, which gave me oversight rights. And what I found was interesting. James had been laundering money through offshore accounts. Millions of dollars filtered through fake subsidiaries, shell companies designed to look like legitimate businesses. He had been hiding it well, but not well enough. And then there was the matter of her. Her name was Victoria Hale. Early 30s, blonde, works in marketing at one of Sinclair Global's subsidiary firms. Beautiful, ambitious, and stupid enough to sleep with a married man who had more to lose than she did. I tracked their meetings through his calendar, discreet hotel reservations, business dinners that were anything but professional. I even intercepted some of their text. Victoria, miss you. When can I see you again? James, soon baby. Evelyn is leaving for a conference next weekend. We'll have the house to ourselves. I smiled when I read that one. Because James had made his first mistake. He assumed I was still blind. But I saw everything now. And it was time to strike. The first step was setting the trap. James was scheduled to attend a corporate retreat in Aspen at the end of the month. He had already arranged for Victoria to join him under the pretense of a work trip. I made sure the reservations were confirmed, and I even upgraded their suite. The key was making James feel comfortable. He needed to believe he was winning. I smiled sweetly at him the night before he left. You'll call me, won't you? Of course, James said. His lips brushed over my forehead. I love you, Evie. I nearly laughed at the audacity of it. I love you too, I murmured. While James and Victoria were tucked away in Aspen, I got to work dismantling the foundation beneath him. First, I contacted Sinclair Global's board of directors. Using the evidence I had gathered from James's financial records, I laid out a clear and irrefutable case of fraud and money laundering. I trust you'll know how to handle this, I said coolly. The board members looked pale, stunned. And if this goes public, I trailed off, letting the threat hang in the air. The chairman swallowed hard. Well, take care of it. Good. Second, I hired a private investigator to follow Victoria. Within days, I had photos, crystal clear images of her and James together in Aspen. Them kissing at the hotel bar. Her slipping out of his suite wearing nothing but his shirt. The pictures would be useful later. Very useful. The final strike came when James returned from Aspen. I was waiting for him when he walked through the front door, looking relaxed and pleased with himself. "Hey baby," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I stepped back. "Don't." James frowned. "Evie." "Sit down," I said coldly. His eyes sharpened. "What's wrong?" I tossed the folder onto the table. The photos of him and Victoria spilled across the surface. His face drained of color. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "You're not very careful, James." James's eyes darkened. "Evie, this isn't." "And these?" I pulled out the financial records. "Explain these." James's mouth tightened. "This is business." "No," I said sharply. "This is fraud." He stood. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I do," I interrupted. My voice was calm, steady. "And so does the board." James's face paled. "What did you do?" "I handed over the evidence," I said. "They'll be calling for your resignation by the end of the week." James's breath hitched. "Evie." "And Victoria?" My smile was cold. "I've already leaked the photos. She'll be lucky if she finds a job scrubbing toilets when this is over." James's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You've destroyed me." "No, James." I leaned in, my gaze sharp. "You destroyed yourself. You can't do this to me," he shouted. "I already did." James stumbled toward me, his hands shaking. "Evie, I'm sorry." I smiled faintly. "Too late." I stepped back, turning toward the door. "Enjoy the fallout, James." And then I left him standing there, broken and desperate, as his empire burned to the ground. James was a fool. He thought betrayal could be forgotten. That an apology could fix the damage he had done. That he could crawl into bed with another woman and I would simply get over it. But men like James don't understand consequences. Because men like James have never faced a woman like me. He had built his empire on my name. My family's influence. My connections. And when he chose to betray me, he thought he could walk away with everything intact. But James underestimated me. No. He was about to learn just how cold I could be. James's downfall had begun the moment I handed over the financial records to Sinclair Global's board. The board members weren't just furious, they were terrified. Financial fraud of this magnitude meant criminal charges. James could face fines, audits, and possibly even prison. And Victoria? She had vanished. After the photos of her and James leaked to the press, her reputation was obliterated. The PR fallout was brutal. High-profile clients cut ties with her agency overnight. Her name became synonymous with scandal. But James still had one thing left to lose. His company. And that was the final piece of the puzzle. I showed up at Sinclair Global's emergency board meeting 2 days later. James was already seated at the head of the long glass table when I walked in. His jaw tightened when he saw me. "Evelyn," he said coldly. I smiled faintly. "James." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They had always liked me even more than they had liked James. After all, my family had secured many of Sinclair Global's earliest investors. "Mrs. Sinclair requested to speak," the chairman said. "We agreed it was appropriate." James's eyes narrowed. "Appropriate." I sat down across from him, crossing my legs. "I wanted to offer guidance." "You've done enough damage," James growled. I smiled. "Not yet." The chairman cleared his throat. "Evelyn has provided us with compelling evidence of financial misconduct within the company. We're looking at a full-scale investigation." James's hands curled into fists. "We can handle this internally." "No," I said softly. "You can't." James's gaze snapped toward me. "What the hell are you doing?" "Protecting the company," I replied. "From you." James's face twisted with rage. "You wouldn't." I leaned forward. "You made this easy for me, James. All I had to do was show them the evidence." "You..." The chairman cut him off. "The board has voted." James's eyes darkened. "What vote?" The chairman's expression tightened. "A vote of no confidence." James's face drained of color. "You can't be serious." "The vote was unanimous," the chairman said. His gaze flicked toward me. "Mrs. Sinclair has agreed to step in as interim CEO." James's eyes widened. "What?" I smiled faintly. Surprise. James stood, his chest rising and falling sharply. You can't take this from me. I'm not taking it, I said calmly. I'm reclaiming it. James's eyes burned with fury. Evelyn. Security will escort you out, the chairman said coolly. 2 security guards appeared at the door. James's hands trembled as they approached. Evie. I stood. You destroyed this company the moment you betrayed me. I'm just cleaning up the mess. James's face twisted with rage. I built this company. You built it on my connections, I replied. On my family's name. On my influence. James's eyes blazed with hatred. You think you've won? I smiled coldly. I don't think, James. I know. The security guards took him by the arms. James jerked away from them. Evie. I'll send you the divorce papers, I said, walking toward the door. Be sure to sign them quickly. The faster we close this chapter, the faster you can fade into obscurity. James's eyes sharpened. This isn't over. I turned my gaze sharp. Oh, James. It was over the moment you crawled into bed with another woman. James's mouth parted, but no words came out. Goodbye, James. And then I walked out. Becoming the CEO of Sinclair Global wasn't just a strategic move. It was a statement. James had built his reputation on the illusion that he was the mastermind behind the company's success. But now the truth was exposed. The board had known for years that I was the real power behind Sinclair Global's rise. My first day in the CEO's office, I had James's personal items removed from the building. His framed awards were taken down. His nameplate was pulled from the executive door. I even had the office redecorated, sleek, modern furniture, all in shades of black and gold. Ruthless. Regal. James's era was over. Now it was my kingdom. Victoria made the mistake of thinking she could crawl out from the wreckage. 3 weeks after James was removed from Sinclair Global, she appeared in the news, giving a carefully orchestrated interview where she painted herself as the victim of the scandal. James misled me, she claimed. I had no idea he was married. He told me he was separated. It was a pathetic attempt at damage control. And it would have worked, if I hadn't been prepared for it. I released a statement the next day, not through a publicist but personally. Victoria Hale was fully aware of my marriage to James Sinclair. I have evidence of text messages and conversations confirming that fact. Furthermore, financial records indicate that James funneled money from Sinclair Global to fund his personal relationship with Miss Hale. Legal action is currently being considered. Victoria's PR firm dropped her within 24 hours. Her name was ruined. She lost everything. And James? James had been seen stumbling out of a private club 2 nights ago. Drunk. Alone. Pathetic. Exactly where he belonged. James delayed the divorce proceedings for as long as he could, but he had no leverage. I owned the majority of Sinclair Global's assets, including the estate, the cars, and our investment portfolio. The settlement was brutal. I took the house, the vacation properties, the cars, and half of the offshore accounts. James fought it at first. But in the end, his lawyers advised him to settle quietly. James agreed to the terms in silence. His shoulders slumped, his eyes empty. The final court hearing lasted less than 15 minutes. James didn't even look at me as we stood in front of the judge. But I looked at him. And I smiled. Emily called me 3 days after the divorce was finalized. Lena, she said, her voice soft. Can we talk? I sat back in my chair, my smile cold. Why? I wanted to apologize. For what? For everything. You'll have to be more specific, I said. Emily hesitated. James, he told me things. About you. And you believed him? Emily's breath hitched. I thought you'd be angry. I'm not angry. Emily's voice wavered. You're not. No, I said. Because you and James are beneath me. Emily's breath hitched. I miss you. I smiled faintly. That's unfortunate. And then I hung up. I stood in the boardroom of Sinclair Global 2 months later, overlooking the city skyline. William stood beside me, calm, steady. He had been there through it all, quiet in the background, waiting for me to reclaim my crown. You did it, William said. I know. William smiled. So what now? I turned toward him, my gaze sharp. Now. My smile turned dangerous. Now I build an empire. William's eyes darkened. And James. I smiled. He can watch. James Sinclair had lost everything. His company. His money. His reputation. His mistress had fled. His career was in shambles. His name, once synonymous with power and influence, was now a cautionary tale in the financial world. Me. I was thriving. Sinclair Global was now fully under my control. The board had installed me as CEO, and within weeks I had already started restructuring the company, cutting out the dead weight, consolidating power, and driving up profitability. James thought I would crumble when he betrayed me. He thought I'd beg, cry, forgive. But instead I had stripped him of everything he valued and left him broken. And now, it was time to bury him. Because James still had one thing left. His name. And I was about to take that too. James had retreated into silence after the divorce was finalized. I hadn't heard from him in over a month. Not a call, not a text. But I knew exactly where he was. He had moved into a small penthouse apartment downtown. A significant downgrade from the sprawling estate he had shared with me. My sources told me he had been drinking. A lot. Clubbing. Wasting money on cheap distractions. Trying to fill the void I had left behind. Pathetic. But James wasn't my problem anymore. He was a loose end. And loose ends needed to be tied off. Permanently. Taking James's company had been easy. But now I wanted something more permanent. A public humiliation. The kind that would ensure no one in the industry would ever trust him again. I already had the ammunition I needed. During my financial investigation into Sinclair Global, I had found evidence that James had been engaging in insider trading. He had leveraged confidential corporate data to manipulate stock prices. Small enough transactions to avoid immediate suspicion, but consistent enough to attract the attention of the SEC if someone were to, say, tip them off. I contacted my attorney. "Are you certain?" he asked, flipping through the files I had provided him. "Completely," I said coolly. "This could lead to criminal charges," he warned. "Good." He raised an eyebrow. "You want him in prison?" I smiled faintly. "I want him ruined." James wasn't stupid. He was broken, weak, but not stupid. If I wanted to make him walk into the trap willingly, I had to create the illusion of hope. I sent him a message from an anonymous number. "There's a way out of this. Meet me at the Langston Hotel. Room 503. Tomorrow night." I knew he would come. Because men like James are driven by one thing: greed. And once greed takes root, it's only a matter of time before it destroys them. The next night I waited in the Langston Hotel's penthouse suite. James arrived 10 minutes late. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. "Who sent the message?" I turned from the window, glass of wine in hand. "I did." James's eyes widened. "Evie." "Surprised?" asked my voice cold. He rubbed a hand over his face. "Jesus, Evelyn, what the hell are you doing?" "Offering you a deal." James's eyes narrowed. "What kind of deal?" I walked toward him, heels clicking on the marble floor. Sinclair Global's board is prepared to press charges for financial misconduct. The SEC has been alerted to discrepancies in the stock transactions conducted under your authorization. James's face drained of color. "That's impossible." "Oh, it's very possible." I smiled faintly. "And unless you want to spend the next 5 years in a federal prison, you'll do exactly what I say." James's jaw tightened. "You set me up." "I exposed you," I corrected. "You dug your own grave, James. I'm just making sure you stay in it." James's hands curled into fists at his sides. "What do you want?" I leaned in, my voice low and sharp. "You're going to make a public statement. You'll take full responsibility for the financial discrepancies at Sinclair Global. You'll say that you acted alone, that the board was unaware of your actions." James's eyes burned with rage. "And if I don't?" I smiled coldly. "Then I'll make sure the SEC has everything they need to prosecute you." James's mouth twisted. "You're ruthless." "Yes," I said softly. "But you already knew that." James's chest rose and fell sharply. His gaze darkened. "And what do I get in return?" "You'll avoid criminal charges," I said. "You'll walk away with the rest of your dignity intact, assuming you have any left." James stared at me for a long moment. His eyes were filled with rage and hatred. But beneath that, I saw something else. Fear. You don't have a choice, I said. James's mouth twisted. I could still fight this. You could, I agreed. And you would lose. James's breath hitched. You used to love me. My expression didn't change. I used to be naive. James's eyes flashed. And now? How I know better. James's hands trembled at his sides. Tomorrow morning, I said. 10 a.m. press conference. Be there. James's mouth opened as if he was going to argue. But then his shoulders sagged. His eyes darkened. I hope you're proud of yourself, he muttered. I am, I said coolly. James hesitated. You've changed. Good. I turned toward the door. Don't be late. The press conference was held at Sinclair Global's headquarters. James stood behind the podium, his jaw tight, his face pale. The cameras flashed as reporters shouted questions. James gripped the edges of the podium. His knuckles were white. I take full responsibility for the financial discrepancies at Sinclair Global, he said stiffly. The board was unaware of my actions. I apologize to the shareholders, the employees, and the clients who placed their trust in me. A reporter shouted, Are you resigning from the company? James's mouth twisted. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Sinclair Global. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. James's gaze flicked toward the back of the room, toward me. I stood at the edge of the crowd, arms crossed, my expression impassive. James's jaw tightened. His eyes darkened with rage. And beneath that, resignation. He had lost. He knew it. And now the whole world knew it too. 2 days after the press conference, James's name was stripped from Sinclair Global's executive records. The shareholders voted to replace him with me as the permanent CEO. Sinclair Global's stock price stabilized within a week. My leadership was praised in business magazines. The comeback queen, that's what the headlines called me. And James? James disappeared. Rumors said he left the country. But I didn't care. I had taken everything from him. His company, his power, his influence. James Sinclair was nothing now. And I was everything. James was done. Finished. I had taken his company. His power. His reputation. But I wasn't done yet. Because there was still one loose end left to tie up, Victoria Hale. She thought she could walk away from this unscathed. That she could disappear quietly and rebuild her life somewhere else. That after everything she had done, I would let her slip through my fingers. But Victoria had made a fatal mistake. The same mistake James had made. She underestimated me. No. She was going to learn the hard way that betraying me came with consequences. Permanent ones. Victoria had disappeared after the press coverage about her affair with James exploded. She had resigned from her agency. More accurately, they had forced her out and gone dark. No social media posts. No public appearances. No statements to the press. But I knew where she was. Victoria was predictable. She had taken refuge at her parents' estate, a sprawling countryside villa outside the city. A pathetic attempt to regroup and hide from the fallout. But she couldn't hide from me. Not when I was holding all the cards. I started with her professional network. Victoria had spent years building connections with wealthy clients and luxury brands. She thrived on reputation and image, on being the polished, elegant face of high society marketing. I called in a few favors. A leaked memo here, a few whispers there. Suddenly, Victoria's name was synonymous with scandal. Her professional relationships dissolved overnight. Her former clients, afraid of the association, distanced themselves quickly. And it didn't stop there. I arranged for a quiet background check to circulate through the marketing industry. A subtle suggestion that Victoria had mismanaged client funds at her previous agency. None of it was provable. But in business, perception is everything. And Victoria's professional standing evaporated within weeks. Victoria had been funded, indirectly, by James for months. Gifts, vacations, expensive jewelry, all paid for through Sinclair Global's black accounts. After I seized control of Sinclair Global, I shut those accounts down. Victoria had nothing left to fall back on. Her apartment in the city, gone. Her credit cards, declined. And when her lease came up for renewal, the landlord refused to extend it. I made sure of that. Victoria was forced to sell her car, a sleek black Mercedes, just to cover basic expenses. But even that wasn't enough. Because I had one final blow left to deliver. It was time to go after the last thing Victoria had left, her name. I knew Victoria had been seeing someone new. Politician. Married. A quiet relationship, carefully hidden from the press, until I arranged for a private investigator to gather evidence. Photos. Texts. Voicemails. It took less than a week for the scandal to break. Former PR star linked to married senator in affair scandal. The fallout was brutal. Victoria's face was plastered across every major tabloid. Paparazzi swarmed her parents' estate. Political analysts debated whether the affair would impact the senator's re-election campaign. Victoria released a statement, desperate and pathetic. I regret my actions. I am deeply sorry for any pain I caused. No one believed her. And when the senator's wife filed for divorce, citing Victoria by name in the court papers, Victoria became toxic overnight. No one wanted to be associated with her. Not professionally. Not socially. She had been erased. It wasn't enough to watch her suffer from a distance. I needed to see her face when she realized I had won. So I arranged a meeting. Victoria received a message, a simple invitation, sent through an anonymous source. She showed up at a small private hotel bar. She looked different. Thinner. Her hair was darker as if she was trying to disappear. Her once glowing complexion was pale and tired. She spotted me immediately. Her lips curled with disdain. Of course it's you. I smiled faintly. Victoria. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes cold. I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face after what you've done. After what I've done? I laughed softly. You slept with my husband. Lied to my face. Helped him steal from me. Victoria's mouth tightened. James lied to me too. Poor Victoria, I said mockingly. Taken advantage of by a married man. How tragic. Her eyes flashed with rage. You've ruined my life. I know. Victoria leaned forward, her nails digging into the table. You think you've won? You think you'll walk away from this untouched? I don't think I've won, I said calmly. I know I have. Victoria's breath hitched. You're a monster. No, Victoria, I said softly. You and James are monsters. I'm simply the person who put you down. Victoria's eyes darkened. Why are you doing this? Because you made the mistake of thinking I was weak. I leaned in, my gaze sharp. You thought I'd cry and disappear. You thought I'd let you walk away after you humiliated me. Victoria's lips trembled. You underestimated me, I whispered. And now you're paying the price. Victoria swallowed hard. So what now? You've destroyed me. Are you here to watch me beg? No, I said. I'm here to give you a gift. Her eyes narrowed. A gift. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. Victoria picked it up, her hand shaking. Her eyes scanned the contents and her face paled. This is, her voice faltered. A confidentiality agreement, I said smoothly. It states that you will refrain from speaking about me, James Sinclair Global, or the events leading up to your fall from grace. Victoria's hand tightened around the paper. And if I refuse? Then I'll release the rest of the evidence I have on you, I said. And this time, the senator won't be the only one whose reputation burns. Victoria's mouth twisted. You're insane. No, I said. I'm thorough. Victoria's hand trembled as she signed the document. I smiled. Pleasure doing business with you. Victoria's gaze sharpened. You think you've won? I have. Victoria stood, her shoulders tense. What happens when someone does this to you? I smiled faintly. They wouldn't dare. Victoria's jaw tightened. She hesitated and then walked away without looking back. I sat there for a moment, watching her disappear through the glass doors. She wouldn't come back from this. And now that she was finished, so was James. I didn't expect James to contact me. But a week later he did. I was sitting in my office when my assistant buzzed through. Mrs. Sinclair. It's James Sinclair on line 2. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. James, I said smoothly. You win, his voice was raw. You got everything you wanted. I know. James's breath hitched. So, what happens now? Now. My smile sharpened. You disappear. James's breath shook over the line. Evie. I loved you. No, I said coldly. You loved the life I gave you. The power I handed you. And when you betrayed me, you destroyed yourself. James's voice broke. I'm sorry. I smiled faintly. Too late. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You don't, I said simply. James's breath was shaky. I don't know what to do. Figure it out, I said. I hung up. James wouldn't recover from this. He wouldn't come back. And Victoria? She was already gone. I had taken everything from them. And I wasn't sorry. Revenge isn't the end of the story. I had destroyed James and Victoria, reduced them to shadows of their former selves. Their careers, reputations, and social standing were gone, burned to ashes beneath the weight of my carefully executed plan. But revenge isn't fulfillment. It had been satisfying, watching James crumble, hearing Victoria's broken apology, but satisfaction fades. Success, on the other hand, is permanent. And now that I had reclaimed my power, I wasn't interested in sitting back and admiring my handiwork. No, I was going to build something greater. Something that would last. James thought he had left me broken. But I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. 6 months after the final blow, Sinclair Global was thriving under my leadership. The restructuring process had been brutal but necessary. I had cut loose every executive loyal to James, removed the rot from the foundation of the company. And the results were already showing. Our stock value had increased by nearly 30% since I took over. Shareholders were pleased. Investors were lining up. Business publications were calling me the Ice Queen. A cold but brilliant leader who had saved Sinclair Global from collapse. I wore the title proudly. James had led with arrogance and recklessness. I led with calculation and precision. And unlike James, I had no desire to be liked. I wanted to be feared. And it was working. I wasn't content with simply stabilizing Sinclair Global. I wanted to expand. We were strong in the domestic market, but weak internationally. James had always been hesitant about expansion, but I didn't share his weakness. Within 3 months, I had initiated deals with several international firms, securing partnerships in London, Paris, and Tokyo. It wasn't just about growth. It was about dominance. And when Sinclair Global became a global power, my name would be the one attached to it. Not James's. It happened at a business gala in London. I was there to secure a merger deal with a British investment firm, a critical move for Sinclair Global's expansion strategy. The room was elegant, high ceilings, gold-trimmed chandeliers, and men in perfectly tailored suits. I wore a black silk dress, simple, sharp, powerful. I was standing near the bar when I felt someone's gaze on me. I turned and met the eyes of a tall, dark-haired man across the room. He was stunning, broad shoulders beneath a tailored tuxedo, sharp jawline, piercing gray eyes that cut through the noise of the room. He walked toward me with an easy, confident stride. Evelyn Sinclair? He said, his voice low and smooth. Depends on who's asking. He smiled faintly. Damien Lancaster. My eyes narrowed. The name was familiar. Lancaster International. Old money. Banking empire. Ruthless reputation. I've heard of you, I said. Likewise. Damien's gaze sharpened. It's hard not to notice when someone dismantles a financial empire overnight. I smiled. James deserved worse. Damien's eyes darkened with interest. I like a woman who knows how to handle her enemies. And how do you handle yours? He leaned in slightly. By knowing exactly where to strike. Our eyes met and the air between us shifted, charged, dangerous. I hear you're looking to expand into Europe, Damien said. I am. I might be able to help with that. Why would you help me? Damien's mouth curled into a dangerous smile. Because power recognizes power. I studied him for a long moment. He wasn't like James. There was no weakness beneath the charm. No cracks in the armor. Damien Lancaster was dangerous. And I was intrigued. Let's see if you're worth my time, I said coolly. Damien's smile sharpened. Oh, I am. The business negotiations with Lancaster International moved quickly. Damien was sharp, strategic. A step ahead of everyone else in the room. I had met men like him before. Powerful men who thought charm could mask weakness. But Damien wasn't pretending. He was sharp, focused. He saw the angles I saw. And he respected my intelligence, something James had never done. After we closed the deal, Damien took me out for dinner. A private restaurant. No cameras, no distractions. You didn't need me to close that deal, Damien said as we sat down. No, I said. I didn't. Then why did you let me help? I smiled faintly. Because it amused me to watch you work for it. Damien's eyes glinted with dark amusement. You're dangerous, Evelyn. And I like it. He reached across the table, his hand brushing over mine. I didn't pull away. I'm not looking for anything serious, I said softly. Damien's gaze darkened. Neither am I. Good. Damien's hand tightened around mine. But I am looking for someone who knows how to win. My lips curved. I don't lose. Damien's gaze sharpened. Neither do I. The tension between us crackled. Damien leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear. Shall we see what happens when two winners stop playing games? My heart hammered. I guess we'll find out. Damien and I weren't in love. What we had was alignment. We understood each other, the hunger for power, the drive for dominance. We didn't need softness or sentiment. We needed strength. Damien didn't try to control me. He didn't patronize me. He stood beside me, a partner, not a threat. We attended events together. Sleek, dangerous, untouchable. The business world started whispering about the new power couple. Damien Lancaster and Evelyn Sinclair. A match made in hell. I wore that title with pride. James showed up at Sinclair Global's headquarters one evening. I was sitting in my office when my assistant buzzed through. Mrs. Sinclair. James Sinclair is here. I smiled coldly. Send him up. James walked into my office looking older, thinner. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were dark and hollow. Evelyn, he said quietly. James. He sat down. His hands were shaking. Look, well, he said. I am. James's gaze tightened. I heard about you and Damien Lancaster. I smiled faintly. News travels fast. James's jaw tightened. He's dangerous. So am I. James's mouth curled bitterly. You've changed. Good. James's eyes darkened. I want to come back. I laughed softly. To what? To us, James said. I made a mistake. I should have chosen you. My smile turned sharp. You did choose me, James. And then you destroyed it. James's breath shook. I can fix it. No, I said coldly. You can't. James's eyes flashed. You can't seriously think, Lancaster. I'm not asking for your approval, James. I leaned back in my chair. And I don't care what you think. James's hands curled into fists. You'll regret this. I smiled faintly. I don't think so. James stood, his mouth tightening. Goodbye, Evelyn. Goodbye, James. He turned and walked out. And I didn't look back. The end.